So today I thought we would talk about the subject of injuries in Jiu Jitsu. Injuries are a frustrating and somewhat unavoidable risk when you train in a combat martial art. Injuries are a risk of any sport, really. And the most frustrating part of an injury is the loss of momentum. You want momentum in your life. You want momentum in your career. You want momentum in your relationships. You want momentum in the sport that you do. And you're going to lose at least some momentum when you get injured. You can make it a lot worse on yourself by completely walking away from your sport while you're injured and lose all momentum. Or you can try to retain some momentum by keeping your head in the game and by continuing to improve in the areas that can be improved. And so I thought today we would talk about that. So let's talk about it. I'm a little late getting this week's video out because I was up in Wyoming attending my son's wedding. He married a beautiful Jiu Jitsu girl, and so the Ellis family is rejoicing at its new family member. And while I was up in Wyoming, I got a chance to promote one of my old students to brown belt, and that was really special. And when I came home, I was feeling extremely motivated. I've had a lot of travel. I had to take time off because of my clavicle injury, and I've just been very, very busy, but my schedule's pretty light for the next few months, and so I saw this as an opportunity to really jump back in and get back to some really good, solid training. Some people think that by the time you reach black belt, you've done it, right? You're an expert in Jiu Jitsu, but the truth is there's so much more to learn and do, and if you're a Jiu Jitsu professional, you got to be training, you got to be doing it. And so I was very excited to jump back in. I had one great training session, and then the next morning I woke up with a sore throat, which turned into a low-grade fever, which turned into a head cold, chest cold, cough thing. And so my plan had been to do 3 or 4 jiu-jitsu training sessions this week and a couple weightlifting sessions, and I got one session in and I got sick. And so, that loss of momentum is something that's just going to happen now and again. Sometimes you get sick, sometimes you get hurt, sometimes things happen in your family life, career, etc., and you just have to take some time off. But like I said, you got to keep your head in the game. That's the main thing, keeping your head in the game. Now, it's important to understand the difference between being hurt and being injured. That's, I think, a good place to start this discussion. Being hurt is not necessarily an injury. Being hurt can be the precursor to an injury. It can be an indicator that you're going to injure yourself if you continue doing the things that made that thing hurt. But that's not necessarily an injury, and generally you're going to be able to train through those things in some way. If we take time off of training every time we have an ache or a pain, well, that's going to be a slow journey. And so you have to learn how to navigate that, how to train through those those aches and pains in a way that's safe for you. The flip side of that is an actual injury where you have hurt something. Now, here's where it gets risky when you get injured. Generally, it's been my experience that when you get injured, you have to go through the stages of grief. This will happen organically. And the first stage of grief is the most dangerous. The first stage of grief is denial. When I dislocated my clavicle, it popped. I got compressed, it popped. The next day it was really sore, but I was totally in denial about this being a real injury. In fact, I said, I don't have time for this. I've got travel coming up. I've got seminars to teach. I've got students to deal with. I don't have time for this. And so what did I do? I kept training. I kept going to the gym. I kept pushing hard. A few weeks later, what started out as just a clavicle dislocation ended up being a torn pec and lots of nerve pain because I chafed up my brachial plexus. I've got nerve pain in my scapula and in the front. All I did was make it worse. because I was in denial about the problem. And this is risky, but I've seen it many, many times. I've seen it with my students. I've seen it with myself, where you have to go through the stages of grief. You go into denial, then anger is the next stage. No, why did this happen to me? I can't believe this is always happening to me. And then bargaining. There's got to be a way. There has to be something we can do here. And then eventually you get to depression, where you're just, man, I'm just bummed out. I'm not going to be able to train. I'm going to have to take time off. I'm bummed out. And then you get to acceptance. And acceptance is the most positive place that you can be, because acceptance means now you're moving forward in a realistic way, acknowledging that you have an injury. And so I believe that what we need to do is learn how to keep our head in the game while we're going through an injury and improve the things that can be improved, even if we can't totally improve physically. And so what do I think we should do? Well, number one is I think it's important to keep going to class. Just because you're injured doesn't mean you can't go watch class, right? You can continue being a part of that community. You can continue interfacing with your friends. You're not gone from that environment, so people forget about you. You're in the mix. You're just not training, and you're staying to watch the rolling. It's incredibly valuable to watch class and watch rolling, because that's a coach's perspective. I have a student named Ty, great jiu-jitsu. He lives up in Alaska now. He didn't tap to a heel hook, and he destroyed his knee and had surgery, and he was out for like 6 months, but yet Ty was in class almost every single day with his leg brace on, sitting on the side of the mat, watching class. And I would sit with him during the rolling. Sometimes I'd sit and chit chat with him. And it was amazing how much he felt his knowledge base was growing just by watching people roll and watching people train. He had many, many epiphanies during that period about his own game and his own approach to jiu-jitsu. And he would tell me, he's like, man, I've realized that I'm too hard-headed. When I get in that position, I'm just muscling stuff. I need to, be a little more fluid there, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. And he was already reimagining how his jiu-jitsu could be based on the input that he was getting just by watching jiu-jitsu. And so I would highly recommend doing that. Continuing to consume jiu-jitsu media. When I, during one of my injuries, I've always been a list maker. I'm always someone that, I'm a jiu-jitsu coach, so I have lots and lots of lists with techniques and technique sequences that I like, and a document that I can refer to now and again if I'm looking for a lesson plan, or if I'm just trying to make sure I don't have any gaps in the things that I'm teaching. And so during one of my injuries, I decided to watch all of the instructional DVDs that I had amassed up until that point. I was a purple belt at the time, and I had like 90 jiu-jitsu DVDs. And so for the next year, I watched all of these DVDs, and I continued adding to my list of techniques, cross-referencing to videos and so on. And so I feel like after that year, when I came back to training, my knowledge base was better. Now, knowledge is not the same thing as skill. Skill requires knowledge, but knowledge is not skill. Those are very different. So you might be able to increase a lot of knowledge. It's going to take time to turn that into skill, but knowledge is the precursor to skill, and you can improve your knowledge a lot while you are off the mat by simply observing class or consuming media or visualizing, thinking about it. There's some very interesting studies on the subject of visualization. Visualization is insanely powerful. There was a study in which they took two groups of people, and they had one group doing finger exercises for 6 weeks, and they had another group simply visualizing those finger exercises for 6 weeks. And it turns out that the group that was visualizing, they actually increased their strength 60% of the group that was doing the exercises. And the reason for that is that to your brain, the act of seeing something and the act of doing something are not all that different. If you were to visualize an object, say a puppy dog, your visual cortex is going to light up the same way it would if you actually looked at a puppy dog. And so I think visualization is very underrated. I think watching class, consuming media, and then taking some time after doing that and really visualizing. I used to do that, years ago, consistently. I would go to class, and when I came home and I was laying in bed at night, I would always visualize the things that I learned in class that day. And I would imagine myself running them and running the sequences. And I feel that it really helped me and it really improved me. So that's one way to increase your knowledge, to keep your head in the game. Then at some point, you're going to be able to get back on the mat and train, even though you're not going to be 100% recovered. I'm back to training, even though I'm not 100%, and I'm having to manage this kind of carefully. There's certain patterns that I can't do right now safely, so I have to avoid them. There's certain positions that I need to avoid, and so on. Well, this is an opportunity to reimagine your game. It's an opportunity to improve your game in areas that are weaker instead of going straight to your A game. Your A game probably contains that thing that got injured. And so a great example of this is a good friend of mine, a great black belt named Alan Shade. He had to have his jaw surgically reconstructed. He had a congenital issue with his jaw, and over his lifetime, he had to have a few different surgeries. And so they did this big, invasive, kind of surgery to his jaw. Well, for the next year, he had to be extremely careful with that jaw. He couldn't get cross-faced. He had to be careful to not get smashed. So what he did was, instead, he decided, all I'm going to do for the next year is play leg locks. I am not going to let anybody touch my upper body. I'm going to be a leg lock machine all the time. And he developed one of the best leg lock games of anybody that I know. In fact, he taught me the reason that I know the cross ashi position, right? The 411, the honey hole, whatever you want to call it. I learned it from Alan, and I love that position now. In fact, he brought a lot of those leg lock techniques into our lineage, and I'm very grateful for that. And so that's an example of expanding your game in areas that is weak in order to avoid the injury. Maybe, because my clavicle is a problem, right? Laying on that side is a problem. Well, I realized that one of my patterns, because I play guard a lot, is that I tend to be more on my right side than my left side. People tend to pass to my right, so I end up on my right side. I tend to play half guard on my right side more than my left side. Well, for me, this is an opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to be on my right side for a while. I'm going to do everything on my opposite side, even though it's not as natural for me. So there are ways to improve in order to allow something to heal a little more safely. So those are my primary thoughts about injury. You have to get through the stages of grief quickly. You have to find ways to improve mentally in terms of your understanding of Jiu Jitsu. If you can't be on the mat, certainly go watch. And then when you come back to training, figure out how to train in a way that lets you expand your game, expand your knowledge base, expand the things you do, so that you are coming back safely and giving yourself a new skill set that you can then employ to have a more well-rounded game. So let me know your thoughts below. If you have dealt with injuries, I'd love to hear about it below. I would love to hear if you have any additional advice beyond the things that I have suggested. And I wish you well, and I look forward to talking to you guys next time.